Hey, welcome NASCAR fantasy racing fans to this week's edition of Dan Beaver's NASCAR Fantasy Pit Stop. I'm Charlie Turner. He's Dan Beaver down in Texas. How you doing, Dan?
Doing great. Temperature is still in the 80s, not the 90s, and makes it a good time to be here.
Yeah, that's great. We're somewhere right around 70 degrees today and sunny. It's a beautiful day here in the Midwest. So we're going to for the second time in 2014. We're going to New Hampshire Motor Speedway, the Magic Mile. Sorry, get crossed up. Got the Monster Mile next week. Magic Mile, kind of flat, 1 mile track, pretty fast, sometimes treacherous. I would think that the results from the first trip there would weigh heavily on how you look at this week. But I'm not the fantasy racing expert, so I'll leave that stuff to you.
Yeah, it absolutely does. This is one of those tracks that is probably the most prone to streaks of them all. In the last, started tracking this closely probably beginning of 2010, and in the last 4 years, New Hampshire, they've got like, that's kind of hard to read. I think 14 top 15 or 13 top 15s in 2012. Um, they've been 10, 11 in other seasons. So among the drivers that finished in the top 15, those are the ones that are going to be at the top of your list, unless there was some extenuating circumstances. And at the end of that race, the Camping World RV Sales 301, there were a lot of extenuating circumstances. A couple of drivers running out of gas, Joey Logano getting wrecked by Morgan Shepherd. There are just a few things that skewed the results. So those guys can't be overlooked either. But the guys that finished up the front, including dark horses like Ricky Stenhouse, I think make good. You need to pay attention to them.
Okay, well, we always start, or at least we traditionally have started off these hangouts, this fantasy pit stop hangout, with talking about salary cap games to begin with, and I don't see any reason to change that up this week. Anything change? Where this is now, this along with being the second race at New Hampshire this year, it's also the second race in the Chase, of course. Does that affect anything that you're going to do today in, let's say, in the salary cap type game?
It affects things overall in any game, in that the chasers tend to do extremely well in the first 3 weeks of the chase. There was a lot made last week about the win always going to a chase contender in the first week of the playoffs, and that's true. For the longest time, that meant that New Hampshire was perfect because it had the anchor position, and it still is now that it moved to the second position. A chase driver's won every edition of the first 10 chase races on this track. Same as next week at Dover, and the 4 times that Chicagoland has hosted the inaugural race. So that's a perfect track as well for chase contenders. But it's not just the victory. The chase contenders tend to get off to, as a whole, as a group, they get off to a great start. Someone has bad races, like Eric Almirola did last week, like Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Joey Logano did last year. But in general, you're going to see the top 10, the top 15 dominated by the 16 chase contenders this year. And that impacts who you pick. Allmendinger could make a good dark horse because he has something to prove. He didn't finish badly enough last week that he's completely out. Is in a position where he has to win, so he's risky because he's going to be gambling for the win. But Allmendinger's got one more week where if he could get a solid top 10 finish, he could put himself back into the conversation about moving on to the contender round, and that's going to impact the way that the team runs. They can't gamble foolishly, but they will gamble to get to the front of the pack, and if it pays off, it makes them a good dark horse. Then we also mentioned the streaks, and there are a number of drivers who performed well this summer that you don't normally think about. You're not always Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is not always front of mind, but he finished 9th in the Camping World RV Sales 301. He might have missed those if Kevin Harvick and Jeff Gordon hadn't run out of gas at the last minute, but he still would have finished 11th or 12th, gives him the top 15. and is a strong indicator that he'll probably finish in the top 15 again. Martin Truex Jr. Has not been consistently strong in his new ride, and I think there's a bit of a letdown going from Michael Waltrip Racing, the notoriety, the popularity that he had with that team, and being
Dan's screen is frozen a little bit here. We'll see if we can hold off long enough for the bandwidth to catch up with whatever's going on. The weather's probably too nice for this thing to happen today in both Texas and Ohio, but sometimes this thing happens with the Google Hangout technology. So we'll hang on in here for a second. We may, if necessary, we'll get Dan signed back in again. Sometimes we lose a connection there, but yeah, I mean, it's New Hampshire to me, and I'm not the expert. If you're making your picks based on this broadcast and this hangout, make it based on what you hear from Dan Beaver, not from me. But I have found over the years that this is one of the tracks that seems to be it's a course for horses. If you've got a driver who's been good here in the past, it's pretty safe to go back that way. I'm going to re-invite Dan back into this and see if maybe that helps us get through this. And bear with us here, folks. Live technology. Sometimes you have to deal with stuff, but we've been relatively lucky up till now. I don't remember exactly where he stopped talking, though. That'll be the problem when we get him back in here. Figure out where he stopped, and because he won't know probably. I know he was talking about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. And Stenhouse had a good, decent run last week. He was the top finishing Roush driver at Chicagoland Speedway. Also had two other drivers who were not Chase qualifiers who finished top 10 at Chicagoland. So if you believe in momentum, you might want to look at the drivers like Kyle Larson, who's been pretty studly all year, and Jamie McMurray also was a top 10 finisher at Chicagoland. So I don't know if those will play into what Dan would do advice-wise for you for the Hangouts this week, but I suspect that Kyle Larson's probably always going to be in the picture for particularly for the C-class drivers in the Yahoo game, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and maybe the less expensive drivers. Hey, there we go. I've been killing time. Boy, I can't, for me to talk fantasy racing for 5 minutes, that makes, I gave it a big disclaimer. Don't pick based on what I'm telling you. But.
Yeah, well, welcome to rural Texas and Hill Country Telephone Company.
Yeah. And Google Plus Hangout technology is also a little bit buggy still. So anyway, all I did, Dan, you kind of cut you out when you were talking about Ricky Stenhouse. So I just went on with that and talked a little bit about the other two of the non-Chase qualifiers that did well at Chicagoland, just for consideration, bringing up Kyle Larson's real strong finish at Chicagoland and also Jamie McMurray top 10. So I don't know if those will, if that momentum from Chicago will carry into your picks or your advice this week, but that's where we left it.
Well, and Kyle Larson had a third place finish here in the spring and in the summer, and a third place finish last week. Another thing that needs to be mentioned there is 5 drivers have gotten their first victory on this track, including who are those 5 drivers? I'll find them here in a minute. But 5 other drivers have gotten their first victory on this track, and it's been kind to guys looking for that. So I think that factors into Harvick or Larson's handicap this week. Apparently, I got cut off before I started talking about Martin Truex Jr.
Yep, we didn't get to that. Yep, didn't hear any of that. So
he's another driver that does well on this track. He has not performed to the degree that Kurt Busch did in this ride, and I think he's suffering from a little bit of malaise going from the Michael Waltrip highly visible team to Barney Visor's less visible team. But he finished 12th here in summer, and I think that makes him a solid dark horse, and he's certainly going to be inexpensive where salary caps are concerned. The 5 drivers who got their first victory here, Joey Logano in 2009, Clint Bowyer in 2007, Ryan Newman in 2002, Robbie Gordon in 2001, and Joe Nemechek in 1999. So 2009 and 7 are at least close enough that you can keep that. You can expect that trend could continue.
here's this real Texas thing again, maybe. Hopefully we'll get Dan back on this time before we have to re-sign. There he is.
Oh, I didn't even see that I went down that time.
Yeah, for a couple seconds there.
Oh, this is ridiculous. But that's what DSL technology is these days.
Yeah.
I was reading off the 5 winners. 2 most recent, Logano and Boyer, are recent enough that I think that factors into Larson's handicap.
Well, Boyer's another one of those guys that did not qualify for the chase, but I would think he might be a consideration for either B in Yahoo or if he's a good enough value in a salary cap game this week.
He is, and his numbers certainly point his New Hampshire point that direction. But he's been so inconsistent that he's a little scary. If I were going to take a risk on him, I'd probably wait till next week at Dover, where he's got even better numbers.
Yeah.
Streak of top 10s, and I might take the risks there. But he swept the top 5 in 2012 at New Hampshire. He had a 13th and 17th last year, and a 6th this summer. So, yeah, you could do worse.
Okay, so who are the obvious, I guess, top of the board picks for this week? Or is there somebody, maybe it's not obvious? What am I saying?
I think it is obvious. I think Brad Keselowski and Jeff Gordon, they finished 1-2 the last 2 weeks. There's no reason to think that they're not going to finish in the top 5 again. They would have finished 1-2 at New Hampshire. Probably would have finished 1-2 if Gordon had gotten a decent restart, but he ran out of gas on the final caution flag while he was running second. So they've got that combination of recent momentum and track record that makes them really attractive. For that reason, Logano's there too. He was running second when he got taken out by Morgan Shepherd, and he finished 4th last week. He's been consistent all year. I think this could be his year to win the championship, based on that, on speed and consistency. So he's going to be up there. And Harvick, it's that usual cast of characters. Harvick will be there unless they make a mistake late. Last week they made their mistake early. It's almost certain that they're going to make another mistake. Stewart-Haas, all of their teams are not flawless enough that you can't expect them not to make mistakes. So they're going to make a mistake. They just need to make it early in the race, and then he'll contend for a top 5.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Harvick got interviewed after the race on Sunday at Chicagoland, and they asked him about some of those things. He said, "Hey, we've only been together as a team for 10 months, something like that." So he thinks that they're doing a remarkable job, and I think they are too. So, but you have to kind of have that caveat there that this may be the week they screw up big time.
Well, and yeah, they've only been together as a team that long, but the crew members certainly, I don't know the makeup of each of the crews, and it's not a personal attack, but they've been doing this for a long time. They've got enough money that they're not hiring people off the street or people that don't have experience. And some of it is that clicking, that they need to click, but they've been through a 3-car team for a while. The addition of one team might have screwed up one team, but it shouldn't have screwed up all 4. So I think there's probably a little something more going there.
All right. So you've got one or both of the Penske drivers and Jeff Gordon up top. Who can you fill out with in this kind of a middle value expense driver in a salary cap game this week? Who are you looking for?
Earnhardt just missed the top 10 last week. He's struggled enough in the last 4 or 5 weeks that his salary cap should have dropped a little bit. But he's another consistent driver on this track with a 5-race top 15 streak. Ryan Newman has been consistent, and he got to the chase by earning points. So he's going to continue to earn points. He's going to finish somewhere in the 8th to 15th place range. So he's not someone that would anchor your salary cap game. But if he fits that middle niche, he deserves to start. And this is one of those races where I tend to start at the top and the bottom and then fill in the middle. So you look for good dark horses, you look for good marquee drivers, and then you fill in the middle 2 drivers however they fit best in terms of your salary.
Okay.
Am I still there? Okay.
Yeah, you're still there. I'm just
getting a little paranoid.
No, you've been fine. We had a couple little blips, but the connection's been pretty good. I don't think anybody's missed anything pertinent. So, all right. Well, that's I guess that pretty much covers it for the salary cap games. Any final thoughts about that before we move on to advice on the Yahoo game?
No. The tip about go with the marquee drivers, go with the smaller drivers, that changes every week. So
Right.
you got to kind of know which. A couple of weeks when we go to Talladega, it doesn't matter. There are a couple of races where you've got just absolute drivers that are going to dominate, and you'd want to start at the top. So, but here, it's a nice mix. You can. And it's got a nice mix of dark horses and marquee drivers that finish in the top 10, top 15. So this is a good week to make up some ground on your competition. It's also a good week to watch practice. Number of the drivers that dominated the race were great in the morning and happy hour sessions on Saturday this summer. So you want to watch practice. You want to look at those average speeds. And you want to read the coverage that gets popped up on Roto World and Yahoo later, based on qualification and practices.
Which we'll get into a little bit where people can go to get that. But you know, the names that keep popping into my head when I want to ask you about somebody, they're all Stewart-Haas racing drivers. I mean, I would think Kurt Busch would be a decent pick here. Tony Stewart also. I mean, this is Tony's kind of track. It's kind of a mini Indy kind of track. It's been a good place for him, kind of flat driver's track. I would think both those guys, if they can stay out of trouble and stay out of mistakes, would have a decent shot at a real good finish here. And then at the lower end of the spectrum, even Danica, I think, is probably not a bad pick for a cheap driver.
Well, we'll talk about Danica probably when we get to see a little bit more, but she has had some success on 1 mile flat tracks.
Right.
She's had a couple of good races at Phoenix, although she hasn't always gotten the finishes that she deserves. I think Danica is a much better value now on the similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks based on her Kansas and Atlanta showings earlier this year. I think that's where they're putting the emphasis for her, and that raises her capital there. Tony Stewart, just don't know exactly how distracted he still is because of his personal issues. And this week we found out that the investigation is going to a grand jury. They'll decide whether or not to indict on some sort of criminal charges, which suggests that either the DA doesn't want to be the one responsible for signing off on it, or there was something that he saw that at least opened a little bit of question. And at the very least, it continues to be a distraction for Stewart and for Stewart fans. And that could show up on the track.
Yeah, it has to have an effect somehow, I think, and it certainly isn't positive. So,
but his record here is good. He finished 7th this summer, and he's one of those drivers that could sweep the top 10. I don't think his concentration, I don't think his heart is in it the way it needs to be since he came back. And then Kurt Busch hasn't had a top 10 on this track in 6 races. He came close with a 13th last fall, and he finished 17th this spring. So if he's cheap, and he probably should be, and he practices well, he could be a dark horse. But he's not someone that I would go in preloaded on having preloaded my roster with him.
Okay. Well, before we get to the Yahoo game, as Dan mentioned, there are a couple of really good places to get more information, more detailed information than we can bring you here in a 30-minute hangout every week. But Dan writes the preeminent fantasy racing weekly Bible, I guess you'd call it, at yahoosports.com every week. That story is up today, is it?
Yeah, it's been up since late Tuesday. So.
How many pages this week?
22.
Download it.
It's a bit bigger as the season goes along.
That's right. So get over to yahoosports.com and read that from Dan, and then also at rotoworld.com where Dan writes another set of unique content related to NASCAR fantasy racing too. So both those places you want to go to get Dan, and then follow Dan all week on Twitter at Fantasy Race to get real time up to the minute stuff. Okay, so we're going to let's go to the Yahoo game, and where do you start this week? I mean, it doesn't matter, I guess, where you start. Where do you want to start talking about it?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You tend to start with A. That's where you're going to put your most concentration because typically those drivers, you don't want to select an A driver unless you think he's capable of winning. I've said that all year, but you look at the numbers, and with Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano being as stout as they have, Group B has as many victories, actually a few more victories, I believe, than Group A has. So you're going to get victories from those guys, but they're probably exhausted. And the victories that have come from at the top of the list are a little more spread out. So you can also miss quite a bit there, too. So when Jimmy Johnson experimented with his tires this summer, it snapped a long streak of strong finishes at New Hampshire and cost fantasy owners a ton of points. So you got to be a little careful that you know, or that you can try to anticipate what the agenda is for those drivers. New Hampshire, we talked about the number of first-time winners, but it's also very democratic in terms of the number of just active winners. I think we have more here than we do on almost any other track. And a great number of those guys, Johnson, Kurt Busch, Gordon, Ryan Newman, Tony Stewart, have 3 victories apiece. So this is a track where it likes to spread the success around, and getting that winner, finding the winner, is probably going to be a little challenging, because you can't get the dark horse winners like Logano with his fuel mileage aided win. Robbie Gordon was a dark horse winner when he beat Jeff Gordon back when he got his first win. So it's kind of a challenge overall. But in Group A, you at least want that. You want your Group A driver to be in the top 5 and challenging for the win towards the end. Jeff Gordon, I've got ranked number 1 at the moment because of his back-to-back second-place finishes at Richmond and Chicagoland, and his second-place effort at New Hampshire. I've got Kevin Harvick ranked 2nd in Group A, with that caveat that he's got to stay out of trouble. And if those don't do it for you, or if you're about to run out of allocations for those 2 drivers, then Matt Kenseth is the guy that I've got ranked 3rd, and he's probably going to be on my provisional roster sitting alongside Kevin Harvick, so that I don't have the temptation to go ahead and exhaust Jeff Gordon. I'm getting down, getting kind of low on allocations. But Kenseth enters the Sylvania 300 with a 6-race top 15 streak, and he's the defending winner from last year's race. He's in a position where he probably will continue to race for points for a little while. He's not going to do anything rash to get the victory, but if he's in the top 5, he's capable of surging at the right time and winning. He'd like to get that goose egg out of the wins column, although he doesn't need to. And I think that's one of the things that you want in your Group A driver. You want someone who's motivated to win, but isn't going to do something rash, isn't going to do something silly at the end. And that's like we saw from Gordon and Harvick at the end of last year. I mean, Gordon, when he ran out of gas under caution, 1 lap shy of the scheduled distance. There's no way he was going to make it to the end, and those kinds of gambles are just foolish. You want someone who's going to gamble smartly, and you kind of know who those guys are after watching for a while.
Hey, you surprised me a little bit with the Kenseth call out, but I can see it. I mean, I absolutely can see it there.
But Kenseth can get called out a lot more often than he does because of that consistency. And you have to decide what it is that you want, raw power or consistency. And with that raw power, Jimmy Johnson, you've got the risk of something happening. And with the consistency, you don't. So it depends on whether or not you need to maintain your position or gain position as to whether or not you're willing to gamble. If you need to gain position, Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, are drivers that probably will help gain position for you, even if it means you're about to run out of them. If you need to maintain position, Kenseth hasn't been flashy enough this year that he's front of mind. He probably hasn't been started a lot of times. He's going to help you maintain position.
All right, so we go to the Group B drivers, which is this kind of the meat of the Yahoo game, isn't it?
It is, and it's getting a little frustrating because it's the same two drivers every week that have dominated. Between them, they've got the lion's share of top two finishes. So you got to kind of, yes, Keselowski, Logano are going to be in the mix. They're only useful if you can use them, and you got to kind of ignore them and think about the other drivers. Ryan Newman, this is a track that's been good to short flat tracks have been good to open wheel drivers in the past. Newman got his first victory here in his rookie season. Casey Kane got his first victory at Richmond. I think Tony Stewart got his first win at Richmond. So these short flat tracks, which the New Hampshire and Richmond fit into that group, are good for former sprint car drivers. Even though they're this far separated from their roots, Newman gets out there and does some of the modified racing from time to time. If there's a modified race at New Hampshire this week, I'm not sure if there is, he'll probably be in it. But he likes to do that, and that gives him some seat time, and I think it gives him a little confidence going into the race. So I've got Newman ranked in the top 5. He'll definitely be on my roster. And then Hamlin is a short flat track master who really let us down at Richmond and really shook my confidence, my faith in him. Finished in the 20s there, not for any reason other than they just missed the setup. You got to hope that they don't do that 2 flat track races in a row. And if they don't, then Hamlin should be right back at the top of his game here. This is one of his top 5 tracks based on career average finishes, same as Richmond was. So by the numbers, he belongs there. He belongs on your provisional roster. But if he struggles in practice, if he does not get a top 10 qualification run or a top 15 at least, if he doesn't get, if he's not in the top 10 in either of the practice sessions or both of the Saturday practice sessions, go ahead and make the hard call and dump him, because he's not going to get magically better in race trim if Richmond is to be believed. Then I've got Tony Stewart ranked up there too. It takes some faith, and you're going to want to watch him in practice, same as Denny Hamlin. But he has a good record here. He has that top 10 finish from the summer, and he should be okay. But with the news coming out this week about the grand jury, who knows? That could shake him a little bit, or it could mean that he's got something to prove, and he wants to get people talking about something else other than the tragedy. Jamie McMurray, I think, fits at the top of the list too. You mentioned him in the salary cap game, but he's got both strength and momentum and consistency here. With the exception of a crash-induced 42nd at Martinsville this spring, he's finished 16th or better in every other short flat track race this year. So McMurray could be the dark horse contender. And that team's finally getting their results to match their efforts. They ran really strong at the beginning of the season, and that crash-induced 42nd place finish at Martinsville is when he got his tire cut by Dale Earnhardt Jr. It was those kinds of weird things, or those kinds of unanticipated things that kept him from being in chase contention. So McMurray should be considered as strong as most of the chasers, and stronger than the ones that are likely to fall off in this first round. So he belongs front of mind.
Okay, does that get us to the C? Is that pretty much all we were looking at for the B drivers?
That's it. I think it gives you a big enough selection, even if you can't use Keselowski and Logano. Yes. There were 4 good drivers there.
So the question in C is, if you have any allocations left for Dillon or Larson, do you use one here this week? And if you want to save something, who's your guy or gal?
For Dillon and Larson, we've been mentioning this for a while, but it bears repeating. Plan out the rest of the year. Their skill.
Yeah, like if you've got 9 allocations combined with those people, you want to be using them now, right? And if you've got 8, you want to use them now, and don't use them for Talladega, right? I mean, that's
right.
No-brainer world.
So if you got them, use them. They're not going to carry over to the next year, and they're going to continue to be the top 2 finishing Group C drivers. If you've got to make your choices, then their power is going to be more effective on the unrestricted intermediate speedways, the cookie cutter tracks that are coming up. So you're going to want to save them maybe for Kansas, Charlotte, Texas. Make sure that they're there. But with Danica running strong on those tracks, you don't have to just think of them for those. So Danica could get tossed into one of those steadily configured non-F tracks too. Then you look at drivers that perform well on drivers' tracks. There are 2 drivers that it comes down to. You're going to think of either Danica Patrick or Justin Allgaier. Patrick has had some strong runs on the short flat tracks in the past. She got off to a slow start this year on this track type, but she surged a little bit towards the end. She was in the 30s at Phoenix, Martinsville in the first Richmond race. Then she improved to 22nd at New Hampshire and 16th at Richmond. If she stays in that same range, high teens, low 20s, she's going to be close enough to Dillon and Larson that she's going to make a good pick. Allgaier has been pretty consistently in the 20s, I believe. You get his exact numbers in front of me, too. And since we had the technical glitches, me leaning forward seems a lot less distracting now than me going away completely. Allgaier's finished in a relatively narrow band between 21st and 30th. One bad finish, and that came at New Hampshire, so that could scare you off a little bit. But he's probably going to finish somewhere in the 20s. So if you've got Allgaier on your roster and Patrick crashes, you're going to look like you did the right thing. If she runs well and outperforms him, you may not. But they're the drivers that are most likely to run well this week. We've also got Mike Wallace in the number 66, I believe. We got Mike Wallace in some car this week. I'm not 100% sure if he's in the Yahoo game, so you're going to want to double check me there. But he could be an interesting pick this week, just because that team's done well with Brett Moffitt behind the wheel, and it's been kind of an interesting pick. So if Mike Wallace is activated in the game, and I haven't checked to see if he is, he might be someone that you just roll the dice on and say could be good, could be I could look like an idiot.
All right. Well, my last question for New Hampshire this time is Morgan Shepherd involved?
Morgan Shepherd is not in the race. But Corey LaJoie is, and he could be that driver that.
That's true. That's true. All right. Any final thoughts?
7. Go ahead.
I just muted myself. Any final thoughts for the Sylvania 300, or is it 301?
No, this one's 300. It's a sprint. You're going to look. You want drivers that qualify well here. It's another one of those tracks. The trend's been that drivers qualifying outside, starting outside the top 25, don't finish in the top 10 unless there are extenuating circumstances. So you're going to look for drivers that qualify well, and you look for drivers with good pit strategy. One reason that this race often devolves into a fuel mileage strategy is that it's hard to pass here, and crew chiefs treat it like a road course. They try to pit as close to the end of their window, close to their fuel window as possible, and go the rest of the way on fuel without stopping for tires. And that's bit them a number of times. Hopefully it won't bite them again this week, but you want to look for those drivers with consistently good strategy. A Brad Keselowski as opposed to a Jeff Gordon.
All right, he is Dan Beaver. You can follow him on Twitter at Fantasy Race. Follow me at onpitrow. And come back next week to join us when we talk about the next race at Dover and the Monster Mile. So, again, thanks again for joining us this week on Dan Beaver's Fantasy Racing Pit Stop. And enjoy the race this weekend, everybody. See you, Dan.
Take care.